Great. We're here today to talk about Blues Brothers.
We have half a tank of gas, no cigarettes because smoking is bad for you. It's dark in here and we're wearing sunglasses.
Yes.
Hit it.
Yes. Great. There's the theme music. And you're listening to A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast. It's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And my name is Jeff. And we already heard from Mary Graham.
Hello.
And Simon's here too.
Hello.
And Simon just took off his sunglasses.
Yeah, I can't see.
You're all taking off your sunglasses.
Yeah, I can't see.
Okay. Okay.
Don't worry, good people who are listening to this. There will be a photo because, of course, this is an audio medium. But I think there needs to be a photo of us sitting around wearing our sunglasses.
Absolutely.
There is no shortage of sunglasses here at the library because we use them as like prize swag. So
this being a library podcast, 75% of the episodes tend to come together because someone in the back office says something about something and someone says that should be an episode.
And Jeff goes, stop talking until I can put you in front of a microphone. God.
Yes.
And I heard you two really love the Blues Brothers.
We do. And the collection tie-in is you can come get the Blues Brothers from this library.
You sure can.
And if you don't own a DVD player, you can sidle over to our library of things and borrow a DVD player.
Mm-hmm.
Although personally, this is my little stump speech for physical media. DVD players are $30, my good people. Invest in one. Streaming platforms do not care about you.
Yes, I agree, but I will say just buy a Blu-ray player, please.
That too, we have Blu-ray.
$50.
We have Blu-ray. Simon makes sure that we have only the finest movies in Blu-ray.
The Blues Brothers is a film that came out in the summer of 1980.
Mm-hmm.
If I could I just nerd out?
And please do.
I'm
do.
about to.
This is.
Oh, fantastic! So I'm gonna ramble a bit. I don't know if I'm gonna cover some points that Simon wants to get to, but hopefully we'll find our way.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Dan Aykroyd really, probably to this day, likes blues and R&B music a lot. He also likes paranormal stuff. Basically, he made movies of his two passions.
Good for him.
And
Dr. Detroit, but we don't talk about that.
Dr. Detroit with music by Devo, I think, or something.
Yes.
Fantastic. So Dan Aykroyd's on SNL, and he has his buddy, John Belushi, and John is like, boy, Dan, you really like blues music. And Dan was like, yeah, what are you talking about? Get on board. And he does. And they turned it into a sketch. Their buddy, Paul Schaefer, who's, I think, part of SNL's band at that point.
He still is, isn't
he? Maybe. I think he might have been the musical director even. He was just crucial, obviously. He was the guy. Keyboardist, pianist, arranger. I don't know. I don't think he was a singer. Paul in the band for SNL backs them up and they do their performance. And then they want to do a live performance on the road. And they want to open up for Steve Martin. And Steve Martin at this point is basically...
You can't see me, but I'm playing the air banjo.
Steve Martin, to his credit, and I hopefully am not getting this wrong because there were lots of amazing comedians in the 70s, but he's the first comedian to basically play for a crowd of thousands. So that's worth mentioning. He was the rock star comedian. And so he is doing one of his big amphitheater performances, and Dan and John do their thing. And Paul was like, hey, can I hook you up with some incredible musicians? No, it wasn't Paul. Well, Paul gave him some leads. Paul was mixed. Paul was like, hey, I really like my SNL Saturday Night Live band. But, Dan was like, hey, these guys from Memphis, these guys from Chicago, these guys from New York, they're amazing.
I'm going to jump in. Like, these guys from Memphis?
Exactly.
Steve Cooper and Donald Duck Dunn, who are literally half of Booker T and the MGs.
Exactly. The Memphis group.
Yeah.
The Memphis group. Basically, Memphis's Motown.
Yeah.
Incredible.
House band for Stax Records.
Incredible. So they perform, they open for Steve Martin, and kind of the rest is history. Then it goes on to being the movie that we're now talking about.
A nearly three hour comedy.
Nearly 3 hour comedy.
With some of the best musical acts of the 20th century.
Yes.
And also, as of the last time I watched it, kind of a fun, perhaps unintentional commentary on the militarization of the American policing system?
Yes.
I think that's there.
Whenever anybody mentions like, oh, this movie couldn't be made today, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
I generally go pish posh. It totally could be.
Sure.
The only one that I'm like, maybe not is Blues Brothers, because it's like,
They wrecked so many police cars.
well, they wreck so many police cars, but it's like the prison system is stupid.
Right.
Cops are not great.
Right.
Anti-fascist.
Right.
Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis. Direct action. Driving Nazis off a bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
More
Direct
of that
action
energy,
gets the good.
please.
So we also recently just got the unrated, not theatrical cut DVD donated to the library. So I was just kind of like scanning through it before this started, and there is an audible FU in the scene with the Nazis from the crowd, and this is still a point in time where the F... Can I say it?
Sure.
Ooh, you say sure. All right. Well, you couldn't just say in a movie back in 1980, but they managed to sneak it in there as someone screaming at the Nazis to off.
Well, that's an intense scene because that crowd is going insane because they evidently hate Nazis. And John Landis was like, hey, crowd, extras, go crazy. And I'm sure one of those extras let it loose.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, he is center framed. You can't miss it.
Man, yeah. So.
And perhaps most importantly, Carrie Fisher with a flamethrower.
Yeah.
Carrie Fisher with the flamethrower. Let me just nerd out and say that we are, you know, it might seem random in August of 2023 to be talking about a movie that came out in the summer of 1980, but we are right about on the cusp of the 45th anniversary of that Steve Martin appearance that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the Blues Brothers giving themselves to the world. I guess we're celebrating that anniversary.
Plus, also, listen, Paul Rubens is in that movie for like 2 seconds.
That's right.
So
he's
the waiter.
The French restaurant.
Yeah.
And that's the fun thing about this movie. So I have seen this movie multiple times. My parents are big fans of it. I was born outside of Chicago. I was born in Barrington, which until my family moved to Detroit was the place my parents had lived in the longest. They'd lived in outside Chicago when my dad was in grad school, and they moved away and later came back for one of his jobs. And so we're very much a Detroit family now, but as we were still settling into Detroit, like, and we still have a lot of love for Chicago. So my parents love this movie because this movie is brought to you by the great city of Chicago. And so I saw it as soon as my parents were like, well, the off-color jokes will fly over her head. We've shown her Mel Brooks. It doesn't seem to have scarred her. And the music's really, really good because we went on a lot of road trips. My extended family's from South Carolina. So every summer we were in the car for 12 hours. And so my parents were like, what a wonderful time to introduce our child to Ray Charles. And they were right. And so, you know, they were like, all right, we can trust this, 12-year-old to sit through a 3-hour movie because Ray Charles is there. And look, that's Aretha Franklin. And we live in Detroit now. And you know who all these people are. Yeah. Jesus H. Christ, I see the light. And then as I've watched it again and again, as I've got older, like there's all this fun appeal. Like when I was 12, I was like, it's Aretha Franklin. And now that I'm in my late 20s, I'm like, it's Aretha Franklin. Those guys hate Nazis. And there's Carrie Fisher with a flamethrower.
Yeah.
You know, it's that there's as you continue your like movie watching life, you find more and more people when you watch this movie that you go, oh my God, it's that guy. And then when you like read about SNL in the 70s and early 80s, you're like, well, of course, because they were all just like, well, just come do my project that I'm doing.
One of my favorite human beings ever, John Candy, of course, too. So incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The cameos in this movie are bananas. And like, again, as a 12-year-old, I'm not going to recognize Paul Rubens, right? Or like Steven Spielberg is in that movie briefly.
Very briefly.
Yeah,
he's the clerk in the office at the end.
And then Frank Oz is the corrections officer. Frank Oz from The Muppets, the voice of Miss Piggy.
And this also seems to me to come from an era when you could sum up the premise of a movie in a sentence.
Yeah.
So like for listeners who haven't seen The Blues Brothers, first of all, go to your local nearest public library and rent it, check it out. But second of all, the premise of the Blues Brothers is that Jake and Elwood are brothers, and they are from Chicago, and they were raised in a Catholic orphanage called something along the lines of Sister Helen of the Holy Shroud, or Saint Helen of the Holy Shroud. The point is, that's not a real thing, but it sounds like one. The person who named that orphanage was clearly so steeped in Chicago Roman Catholicism. Like they hit the nail right on the head. And so the boys go back to the orphanage where they were raised, and they see the Penguin, who is the nun who is in charge of the place. And the Penguin says, well, boys, we're running out of money and the Archdiocese is going to shut us down. And Jake and Elwood are like, this is not acceptable. This is the place that raised us. So they're like, don't worry, sister. We're going to get you the money. We're on a mission from Gad. And so
there is a point where the actress Kathleen Freeman beats them with a ruler.
Yes.
Which my mom, who went to Catholic school, basically did the Leonardo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, yep.
I went to Catholic school, and by that point, the nuns were not allowed to do that anymore. Although we did have one nun who, if you played with your hair in class, I went to an all-girls school. If you played with your hair in class, she would start snipping the scissors in an ominous fashion. As far as I know, she never actually cut a girl's hair, but she did threaten.
But
I love you, Sister Bernice. I hope you're doing well.
You're getting there, but I think that's important to note early on that there's a lot of themes of loyalty.
Oh, for sure.
This movie. Toward who raised them, but then we're getting into Cap Calloway territory.
Towards the orphanage, towards the band. So in order to raise the necessary money to keep the orphanage open, the boys are like, oh, we're getting the band back together. And we're going to tour the band. And the money we make from touring the band, we're going to get to the orphanage, and then it won't close. That is the premise of the next 3 hours are these boys getting the band back together with such musical interludes as Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, Cab Calloway features prominently,
James Brown,
John
Lee Hooker,
and also evading the authorities because they keep, crashing cars into things.
103 cars.
103 cars were destroyed making this movie. And then there's a mysterious woman who's following them trying to kill one of them, and that's Carrie Fisher.
And then they upset the Nazis, as you should.
Yeah, and so then the Nazis are chasing them, and so by the end, they've got the band back together, they're performing to this sold-out auditorium, and they're like, we would also like to thank the fine upstanding members of the Illinois State Law Enforcement who have decided to join us this evening.
The magic trick I think this movie also does is that it feels like a road trip movie without really leaving Chicago. They do travel a little bit to go to Bob's Country Bunker. It's not really stated. It's within drivability.
Yeah.
But in that sense that they keep meeting people in sort of an Odyssey way.
Yes.
Of just like, it feels like
Which
they are.
Which is just what living in a city is like.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like a road trip comedy, but it also feels like a musical. But it's not really a musical. It's kind of a jukebox musical.
Yeah.
But also...
But also it's just an excuse to hear Ray Charles sing Shake a Tail Feather.
Yeah, which... Oh, man. It's funny that we can sum up this movie in like a sentence or two, but Dan Aykroyd had never written a script before. And he turned in a 380-page... Like, this is the lore of the Blues Brothers.
Dan Aykroyd is very excitable.
Yes.
He's very excitable. He also notoriously wrote, like, only a 38-page screenplay for Ghostbusters, which involved who knows what, aliens.
There's something about that just screams sketch comedian to me. Is that he's either going to turn in a 38-page script or a 380-page script.
Dan Aykroyd is a great collaborator.
Yeah.
Like, if he has someone... It's going to be
who
good.
tells him done.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No, John Landis rewrote the 380-page thing into a usable screenplay.
Thank you for your service, John Landis.
Yes. Also, John Landis is in the movie as the cop that gets his watch broken in the mall chase scene.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah.
Amazing. So... they are getting the band back together.
Yes.
And they do eventually.
They do, even though Aretha Franklin's not happy about it.
No,
you better think. You better think about the consequences of your actions.
That's right.
That is my favorite scene.
Guitar Matt Murphy.
From the movie is her singing Think. In part because it's a song that's personally relevant to my life on a number of levels, but also because her demeanor in that film is very much reminiscent of my great-grandmother who raised my mom. And so whenever my mom watches it, she's like, Aretha Franklin in her house slippers, just like Granny. And also, you better think about the consequences of your actions is exactly something my granny would have said. So...
Incredible. Oh, man. So much to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, so... Paul Schaefer was integral in getting this off the ground. Half-ass internet research will tell me that John Belushi was a little moody one time and didn't like that Paul was currently helping Gilda Radner with her Broadway show. So he said, you're not going to be in the movie. We're going to get Murphy Dunn, I think, instead to kind of be there, which he does a fine job. But that's supposed to...
Was John Belushi not also doing quite a bit of cocaine during this film?
And this is the thing. They make up like 6 months later. So... And Schaefer's back in the band. but it's like he misses the movie. So the Murphtones playing in the most 70s lounge that has ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they get the Murphtones and they go over to get guitar Matt Murphy. So little by little, obviously the band gets back together and they go to Bob's Country Bunker. Mm-hmm. The thing I love about this movie is that they encounter these incredible musicians and basically just either sit witness to or are supportive to the performers.
Yeah.
They get to do like 3 songs as the Blues Brothers, but they're really just there to support. And
well, there's a great story about Dan and John like dancing in the background during Think. Like at one point they like get up from where they're sitting at the counter and they're just sort of doing a little dance in the background, which they I don't think they'd really rehearsed. It wasn't scripted, and they were explicitly not trying to take away from the people who were actually doing the number. They were like, we do not want to upstage Aretha Franklin.
Right. They're like not even mouthing along.
No, but they just felt moved by the moment because who wouldn't?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think that is, and I think also in my own half-assed internet research, you know, I had read that there was some trepidation, perhaps on the part of the studios, because when isn't there, about none of these people are. This is not current music.
Right.
Like the pop music of the 1980 is not blues music, and they were like, ask us if we care. It's Ray Charles. Right. Shut up.
Yeah. The studio at the time was very much like, none of these people have had hits in decades. Like, can you at least get some like modern disco people in for blah blah blah? Like apparently even Cab Calloway was like, oh, we could do like a more upbeat version of Minnie the Moocher if you want to make it more poppy. And Dan Aykroyd specifically was like, no. And when you think about the career that Cab Calloway has had, like I think about watching him because I, for various reasons in my academic career, have seen the very creepy Snow White cartoon. Oh, yeah.
That he's the backing vocals for. And that's from like the 40s. And so, you know, you look at that and you look at him in the Blues Brothers 40 years later and you're like, my God, this man like is the history of great American music of the 20th century.
Yeah. And like so much care was put into the soundtrack to this movie. Like not just, obviously everybody gets speaking roles that leads into musical numbers, but even like the incidental background music. Like again, I was just scanning through it before this podcast and there's a bit where they're just driving through town and there's some background music playing. And it takes like several seconds to focus on the 8-track tape, so you know it is Sam and Dave that is playing.
Sure.
Yeah. And like they didn't have to do that.
Or the Peter Gunn theme, which was another 50s.
So I think the rights, but
you do like for me the nostalgia marker is always 30 years. That's why you see kids starting to sound like Nirvana again, and that's why 7 years ago you saw Stranger Things being a thing, because we always look back 30 years. This is like the beginning of everyone looking back to the 50s, which of course peaks later with Back to the Future. So you're starting to see that Peter Gunn theme, etc. I'm just going to jump into it. Do you have favorite scenes from this movie? Not just songs, but like favorite scenes?
There's a couple things I'm partial to. One of them is the visual of the band at the country bar playing behind chicken wire while things are being thrown at them.
Again, part of them being like I read a great article that said this was always, at least those two human beings as comedic actors, this was always supposed to be 50-50 music and comedy. Yeah. And I think they're very careful to do that. They're basically the butt of jokes. Yeah. And it peaks there with the country bunker.
Anything to do with the penguin.
Sure.
In part because I in my personal life know a lot of nuns.
Sure.
They are friends of the family, and my dad has lovingly been calling them penguins since I was
none.
Yeah.
God. You did
That's low even for you.
My grandma's a ruler suddenly.
And of course scenes with the kind of the lines that were famous in my family, like, you know, it's dark outside and we're wearing sunglasses, hit it.
Mission from God.
We're on a mission from God. And like It's
Specifically with a Chicago
it's
accent.
the God. It's the and there's one of the preachers at my church is a wonderful man and a fantastic preacher, but he says it like God, and he's from here, but for some reason he's got the Blues Brothers pronunciation, and so every time he preaches, I'm like, oh, we're on mission. Right. Episcopalians also enjoy making a joke about the Wesley brothers, who ultimately ended up founding Methodism. There are bumper stickers with the two of them wearing sunglasses, and it says, "We're on a mission from God," because that was very much their vibe. But I think perhaps my favorite like non-musical moment is when it is revealed who Carrie Fisher is. And she is the scorned fiance of Jake, who was left at the altar. And he takes off, he's like covered, but she's been like chasing them through the sewers. He's covered in mud, and he takes off his and he takes off his sunglasses for one of the few times in the movie, and just looks at her, and she goes, Jake, baby, and like immediately forgives him. But then he misses their next planned rendezvous, and she tries to kill him again.
Yeah.
Carrie Fisher, I love you, and I know you're listening from your place in the sky.
She was dating Dan Aykroyd at the time.
That makes it even funnier.
Yeah, she wrote about it in one of her memoirs and was just like, yeah, they set up a full bar on set, like.
So those are my highlights. Those are my favorites. Of course, can't forget Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis.
Yeah. I think my favorite non-musical scene is the chase through the mall.
A classic.
Just because they're so deadpan, like, oh wow, Pier 1 imports, smash.
Yep.
The new Oldsmobiles are in early this year.
Yeah.
Malls were kind of just a thing. Like, they were just becoming a thing. So that would have been...
Yep, and that would have been incredibly expensive to film, which, once again, most expensive comedy ever made.
Is there a Jewel Osco in there somewhere? I feel like at some point they're parked in front of a Jewel, which, again... making a lot of family trips to Chicago in my youth. My mom loves the frosted brownies that you can like only get at Jewel Osco. And then there's like, it's not 7-Up. There's some other kind of pop that you can like only get there that my parents would always stock up on. Shame on the family that I can't remember the name of it.
But at least you said pop and not soda.
Well, God, of course. So God, Jeff, where do you think I was raised? And then, there's probably an old style product placement. I think at some point they go past Wrigley Field, like...
Oh, well, no, they put Wrigley Field as their fake address.
Right, yes. Yeah, they're like, whatever, Addison.
Yes.
And it's like...
1060 West.
Yeah, this is Wrigley Field. And, I mean, my parents are diehard Cubs fans. I was raised... One of the first sentences I learned how to say to my grandfather, who pulled for the Atlanta Braves, was "Go Cubbies, no go Braves." Like, you gotta imagine like a 3-year-old. Yeah. So my parents raised me with a lot of Chicago love, and this movie was very much involved in that.
Oh, for sure.
Music is important to them. I think the beginning conversation, Jake is credulous that he sold the Bluesmobile, quote unquote, and he finds out that he traded it for a microphone.
And he's like, oh, okay.
Microphone.
Yes.
And he immediately says, okay, that tracks.
Yeah.
Now, Jake, unfortunately, sweet talks Carrie Fisher, but then dumps her.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, like, some of my favorite aspects are when, again, going back to how much music means to them, John Belushi continues to encounter his old bandmates. His own bandmates continue to say, I don't know if I'm going to go with this again after last time. And he always says, but he's always careful to say, but you were amazing and you still are amazing. And I want to believe there's sincerity there. I know he's kind of a con man too, but I think that music is truly all he cares about. Unfortunately, not Carrie Fisher.
It's kind of this weird, almost reverse Music Man, where they're all still kind of con men, but instead of Harold Hill, who can't tell one note from another, but he's awfully interested in that librarian over there, he's not interested in Carrie Fisher, which skill issue couldn't be me. But music is everything.
Right. Man. All right. So my favorite non-musical scene, it was kind of that. It's basically anytime Jake is showering his bandmates who are leery of him with compliments. And my favorite scene is when Elwood brings Jake to his apartment.
Oh, yep.
The L goes past.
And it's the size of a closet.
Yep.
And yet he still has a bed and a record player and a toaster oven, because what else do you need?
And you then can sleep through the L going past because you get used to it.
There's something cinematic about that sequence that really really moves me. How much does the train go by? So much you won't even notice.
And also so realistic. Like, this is not one of those shows set in New York where you're like, they could not afford that apartment. They're like, that looks like a nice apartment, actually. You know, but the economy is in shambles.
Something so touching about it. Elwood falls asleep and he says, "Hey, you sleaze, you get out of my bed." But then he's like, "Oh, you're my brother."
Yeah.
And you just get a nice little moment with Dan and let the good times roll.
I don't even think he has a toaster oven. I think he literally just puts a piece of toast on a little metal rack on top of the oven.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
White toast. Just plain slices of white toast and
4 fried chickens and a Coke.
And then we can get into the chases in the cars. I think there are no less than 87 cars wrecked, if not more.
103.
Oh my God.
The record was only broken by one of the G.I. Joe sequels, so,
103, but like 98 of them are police cars.
Yes.
And they are trying to make a point.
And one of them is a Ford Pinto, right? Yeah. Like the Nazis they had to get a special license from the Federal Aviation people to drop that car from that height. And the FAA was literally afraid it was going to be too aerodynamic and it would go flying into a building. And they did actually crash it through the Daily Plaza, but they swapped out the glass. So, like, again, most expensive comedy ever made, but like
worth it.
Yeah.
Incredible. And the first SNL movie ever made, but again, they don't know that SNL movies are going to be a thing later.
And they'd actually both left SNL at that point.
Right.
People were really worried it wasn't going to make its money back.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's lots of accidents and crashes and police chases. I think it starts early on. The police pull him over and they realize Elwood has about 100 unpaid tickets and some like a record so long. And he says, "I'm going to pedal the metal." And from then it just increases. More and more people.
And honestly, I mean the
more people they meet musicians and they continue to piss people off. It's like the same graph.
Exactly. And I mean, I think because like, what have these guys done? This is where I think the commentary on the justice system and the militarization of the police comes in.
100%.
Because what have these guys done?
Right.
Put ticket. Vehicular problem tickets and you run some Nazis off a bridge once and everybody's like, "Oh my God, you ran the Nazis off a bridge," instead of "Thank you for your service." And so it just, by the end, they're turning this money in for the orphanage at the office where Steven Spielberg is the clerk. And they do
hundreds of police.
Just by the way, like, they do save the mission from God succeeds.
Oh yeah.
As it should.
But as it should. But they are just surrounded by police with so many guns. Oh my God, there's so many guns. And when you look back at this film and you're like, well, they were just getting the band back together. What's all this hullabaloo?
There's even a couple tanks.
Yes.
And they even shoot down the door.
Well, in the comedic factor of the guys.
Oh, the absurdity, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and it is absurd, but also, the last time I watched this film, I did not have time to watch it close to this because, as we've mentioned, it's nearly 3 hours. It is worth it, though. Sometimes you watch a movie that's nearly 3 hours and you're like, this should have been 90 minutes. I do not think The Blues Brothers is one of those films. But so I didn't have time to rewatch it. But the most recent time I watched this it was a quarantine movie night that my parents and I did. And so there was a lot of, we were all having a good hard think about the role of police in American society. And so I watched this movie and I also became Leo DiCaprio pointing meme where I was like, oh my God, they weren't very happy about the role of police in American society either. And I also think there's something there also about like crime, jail, rock and roll.
Peter Gunn theme,
Gunn theme, exactly. And actually, I didn't come into this podcast expecting to have sort of read-alike book recommendations for this movie. But if you enjoy the Blues Brothers, you should check out Soul Music, which is a Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett, which has the same combination of utter sincerity about the power of rock and roll, really, really funny, and also like all of those tropes about, and they're all kind of on drugs and the police want them. But the music's really good. And at heart, they're good people because they believe in the music. Also, if you read Soul Music, you spend most of the book with Death's goth granddaughter, who shows up in a later book as like goth Mary Poppins. Read Discworld. There are flowcharts about where to start. This has been PSA.
Loyalty to friendship.
Loyalty to
your friends.
Yep.
The thing that kind of really kicks this movie into gear is they go down to see Curtis, who is kind of a father figure to them, Cab Calloway, who I think from scene 1 is wearing a suit and sunglasses.
Yes.
Just like them.
Absolutely.
Even though he's like down in a boiler room.
Yep, down in a boiler room with 3 pictures on the wall, and it is Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and RFK.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's wearing a suit because he has standards.
No, of course. But the whole thing of it is that we owe this to Curtis, and then we owe this also to the Penguin. And later on, when they're getting to the big show, Curtis is rallying all the children. Is it an orphanage?
It is an orphanage.
He's rallying all the children, basically saying, these two were just like you when they were little, so we got to help them. So loyalty.
Well, and also just to use the parlance of the day, like found family,
right?
Mutual aid, yeah.
And I again, it's been a couple years since I've seen it, but I feel like it does. I mean, most of the musicians who perform in this film are Black.
Yeah.
Most of the people doing the musical numbers, and I feel like it. Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi are 2 white guys who, I think the movie does a decent job of being like, and blues, by the way, like came from African American inventions in American culture.
I always gave them the benefit of the doubt that they were there just to be jesters. But to say, listen, these 4.
Yeah.
Well, again, just the care that got put into the soundtrack and making sure that everybody got the credit they were due and making sure everybody got speaking roles, making sure,
I mean, and it just makes me think about, so one of my favorite musicians right now is Hozier, who is very much a blues musician. And it's kind of, it's kind of funny to me. I feel like sort of in the zeitgeist, I don't hear him spoken about as a blues musician, but I think that's really what he is and what he would describe himself as. And he talks all the time in a way I really appreciate about the debt he owes to Black musicians, especially Black American musicians. He's had Mavis Staples, like on his albums. And that's just, it's something I appreciate because the blues, it's good music.
Yeah.
So
I'm resisting speaking very disparagingly of Eric Clapton right now. So let's just let that be implied.
Yeah, insert your own joke here.
Yeah. So that's very important. I think that they absolutely they literally give them the spotlight when it comes to James Brown's case.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, they apparently had just like a heck of a time trying to get both James Brown and Aretha Franklin to lip sync to pre-recorded tracks.
As opposed to doing it live?
Yeah, because they'd never done that before. Yeah. And James Brown, they just gave up. Like that is recorded in that church.
Jeff, can we put like a Hammond B3 under this whole conversation?
For sure.
Yeah. And Aretha Franklin took like dozens of takes.
Oh, man.
I bet. Well, and that feels like something that is like such a consummate musician thing.
Yeah,
it reminds me actually about there's an episode of The West Wing that involves Yo-Yo Ma playing a Bach cello suite in G major, minor. Don't come at me, music people. And they initially were like, hey, world famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma, can you basically mime to playback or play it to playback, and we're gonna cut the audio. And Yo-Yo Ma was like, are you concerned? Do you need it that way for editing purposes? And the director was like, yeah, we need it to be, consistent throughout every take because of how we're going to edit the scene together. Cause it's a really fantastic scene. It's in the episode Noel, and Yo-Yo Ma goes, don't worry. And they let him play it live, and it was exactly the same on every take because he's Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But yeah, there's something there about a failing system and an extremely low morale in America.
Yeah.
And,
and like who's helping each other out? Who's helping all these orphans out? Couple of ex-cons.
Right.
Yep.
And like folks who, until the band gets back together, are working not
food
unskilled labor
jobs.
because no labor is unskilled,
sure. Exactly.
but food service jobs, that are paid like crap and are just, they're like, well, why not get the band? We can be paid like crap and not make music, or we can be paid like crap and make music and maybe, raise some money for these kids.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say, or the Cheese Whiz Factory. I can't forget the Cheese Whiz Factory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you only get in the extended cut. You don't get it in the original theatrical cut. Is you have this whole side thing of Elwood working at the Cheese Whiz Factory.
And in order to get his severance pay out of his boss, goes, I'm becoming a priest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, in a way, he is.
In a way, certainly he's doing things for the greater good of a Catholic orphanage. And is that not basically the same thing?
And so Matt Murphy and saxophonist, I'm forgetting your name, sorry, buddy, are fry cooks.
Lulu Marini.
Thank you, Lulu. They're fry cooks, but even before that, they keep the scene where they're trying to track them down, and you find out that they were boarding. They were boarders in a house. Like, these guys are all broke.
Yeah.
Which also gives me one of my favorite lines. They were nice boys, but they made a lot of noise at night.
Yes.
Yes. From the boarding house. So yeah, loyalty, friends. But man, to go back to the music that's in this movie, every single song is so full of life, so vibrant, so celebratory. I get exhilaration every time I watch this movie, especially during the musical sequences.
Yeah.
And I think that's all there. But then but man, there's this weird undercurrent of just where America was at in 1980. This line that sticks with me for like the weirdest time is they get the guy with the record contract at the end who's backstage, and he's like, yeah, well, I'm going to hook you up. I used to be a bouncer here in the 70s. I'm like, that was last year. Who talks like that? But it just makes me think, like, were we so eager to like leave behind the morass of the 70s that we were already talking like that?
The 70s do not sound...
They don't sound great.
No. I mean, neither do the 80s in hindsight.
Right.
Sure. Insert anti-Ronald Reagan statement here.
Right.
But...
Recession in 82.
Yeah.
But that whole sequence is great. They do Someone to Love.
Everybody needs somebody.
Everybody needs someone to love. And you get that triumphant...
Horn section.
That hook.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
And then they get into Sweet Home Chicago, which is on the soundtrack and basically in the movie 8 minutes long.
Yep. And I mean, we used to listen when my parents and I are big believers, and when you get to a place, you play the music associated with that place.
Yeah, naturally.
So, whenever I fly into New York, it's Billy Joel's New York State of Mind. I went to camp in West Virginia for 16 years, almost heaven. West Virginia. And sometimes side rant to defend the great state of West Virginia. I have had people ask me, I'll quote that song and they'll go, almost heaven, really? West Virginia, is it really? And I'm like, shut up. In every way that matters, it is. Also, go read about the history of West Virginia before you say judgy crap. But yeah, we would always listen to Sweet Home Chicago as we were rolling in. And...
Well, with traffic on the way into Chicago,
it's like
you're going to need those 8 minutes.
You're going to need more than those 8 minutes, frankly, which is why we also had, other, like the actual band Chicago queued up.
Without saying it out loud, it also is the opportunity in the film to have this backing band that's been with the guys the whole time
really shine.
They get a chance to cook.
Yeah. My favorite part of that whole like end performance scene though actually is Minnie the Moocher with the back and forth with the audience, because you just see how like Cab Calloway for his whole career, you're like, man, had people eating out of the palm of his hand.
That was the exact phrase I was gonna use.
Which is just, there's just a level of artistry, and I don't at all want to imply that it doesn't exist anymore, because I don't think that's true.
Well, I would argue that people aren't necessarily allowed to be in that, like at that kind of like audience participation level not to go on a rant about late stage capitalism, but I'm gonna go on a rant.
A scenario where you can have just 500-ish people in a theater like that.
And interacting with them that strongly and having people be like that into it.
And
also.
That present too. Because of course, I mean, it's 1980. Nobody's got a smartphone. Much
not to
less
say,
like a cell phone.
Which again, not to be like, oh, you kids and your phones, but like who would even fill a theater that size and have that kind of audience participation these days? Who would also be that kind of a classic musician who would be able to afford the life that he leads even without putting out hits for a couple decades,
Right.
It is a beautiful moment of giving Cab Calloway his flowers.
Yeah.
You have been in this business for 50 years, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to have an entire theater singing along to you.
Yeah.
It's incredible. With a great band behind.
Yep.
And then you have John Candy ordering orange whips, which I still don't know what they are. I probably asked my dad once or twice. And that leads us into a gigantic police chase.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That goes all night long, which gives us the line. It's 102 miles to Chicago, I think.
Yeah.
We got half a tank of gas, a full pack of cigarettes. It's dark outside, and we're wearing sunglasses.
And hit it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Things go off the rails for the police cars. And John Candy delivers also one of my favorite lines of the movie. This is car 55. We're in a truck.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man.
Not to be like they don't make them like that anymore, but they don't.
They literally don't.
And I'm begging, like, I can't say I'm begging for the return of the mid-budget film when we're talking about the most expensive comedy ever made. Although I am begging for the return of the mid-budget film and also the return of, like, teen comedy adaptations of literature that are good. But it's just hard to... I don't know. Simon, you've seen Barbie. I haven't seen it yet. It feels... Pardon?
It's a tragedy.
Oh, well, yes. I'm waiting for you to get the DVD when the DVD comes out.
Yeah, sure.
So that I can watch it for free.
Sure.
And
I mean, but no, that is the thing, isn't it? Because that was a big practical effects movie where all the sets were actually built, all the backgrounds were painted.
And it was expensive, and also it's all anyone is talking about.
Yeah.
Fun cameos, too.
Tons of fun cameos. Almost a musical.
Interesting parallels
And
here.
so... You know, I don't want to ignore the fact that it is also a 2-hour toy commercial.
Yeah.
But there's just something about the fact that, like, I can't escape it. I turn it, and not that I don't have an interest in seeing it. I just haven't been to a movie theater since 2020. But it's just like, I'm like, hi, Mattel. Like this, it's not the answer to the success of Barbie is not to make a ton of other films based on Mattel toys. It's to invest in comedy, in like. Thoughtful comedy.
That comes up in a lot of the interviews that Greta Gerwig gave before the strike, where she was just like, this is just the only way these movies get made now.
Yeah.
Which,
if they're a massive
like intellectual
production.
property, which I hate.
Yep, same.
Greta Gerwig, I'm so excited you're taking over the Chronicles of Narnia. Please call me.
That's the other thing is that technically this movie could have been on a shoestring because you just need guys in suits in front of musicians.
Right. And but they were like, no, man, we have 98 police cars that aren't going to wreck themselves.
Right.
Yeah. No, we got to drop that Pinto from 1,000 feet in the air.
Because I hate Illinois Nazis.
Yeah.
Buckle up, boys. We got a point to make.
But also, like, this is just a random note, not necessarily a positive one, like 1980s, possibly sketchy stunt coordinating, because, like, people definitely, like, stunt French Connection style.
Today is sketchy.
Yeah.
That's true. So they have this epic chase. They're trying to get to the county clerk.
Something like that, so that they can drop off all this money for
to pay the taxes for the
That's
orphanage.
your big climactic sequence.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to get to a clerk.
To the county clerk, and the county clerk, like, not even like the clerk himself, but the guy working the desk is Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Possibly the most random cameo. What is that? What is that? I'm still
It's so that people could go, it's Steven Spielberg.
Well, if people even knew what Steven Spielberg looked like back then, like before the internet, all these cameos. That is an Easter egg that
only gets better with age.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. It's like, he's like, I don't know. There's no parallel because he's literally Steven Spielberg, but he's still pre-Raiders, pre-E.T. Spielberg. So he's not like a superstar yet.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
They're probably just like, we need your friend Steven? Cool. Yeah, cool. Can he come on Thursday and be the guy?
Shark and the mashed potatoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Paul Rubens was pre-Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah.
Like Frank Oz, everybody knows him as a Muppet, not as Frank Oz.
Right. Like nobody can recognize Frank Oz on sight.
Right.
Well,
or this is the same year.
Cricket
is
did
Yoda.
But
Cricket, Cricket is special when it comes to the Muppets.
Yes.
And we all know this. Yeah, I keep forgetting Frank Oz was also Yoda.
Yeah.
He was also Yoda.
Well.
And And apparently Fozzie and Miss Piggy.
Yes.
And so, completely random because it's late in the afternoon on a weekday, I was rewatching Muppets Take Manhattan.
Naturally.
Directed by Frank Oz.
Yes.
And there's a scene in which Fozzie and Miss Piggy talk to each other, and I was freaking out.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Directing himself, talking to himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The number.
I gotta wonder if he could switch the voices on a dime in between lines.
I think so. I mean, the number of stories I've read about people who work with Muppets, like when like Muppets will do interviews on shows or whatever, it's like they're like, we forget to mic the human.
Right.
Like we have accidentally mic'd Kermit the Frog.
Yes.
And when it hasn't worked, we are confused.
I think it's especially worth noting, and I hopefully don't come off clumsily sounding like an ageist, because I really come close to a lot. But that this movie has staying power with all of us who are still relatively young in the year 2023, when it is kind of a boomer artifact and full of, well, the two leads are themselves boomers, and boomers ate this movie up, but it's staying with us. Old SNL stuff, John Belushi stuff, it's this.
Yeah, the thing that stays with me is the music.
Exactly.
Because I mean, my mom even said to me recently, she was like, why does Sinatra sound classic? Did it sound classic at the time? Right. And I mean, she's younger than the heyday of Sinatra's era, but she's and I have been a snob since I was old enough to know what that meant. And so, you know, while I enjoy a lot of contemporary pop music, there's also part of me that's like, in the 80s, they knew how to make a movie with good music in it.
Right.
Old woman shakes fist at cloud. Old woman has not turned 30 yet. But for me, the staying power is the music. The staying power is the love letter to Chicago. And I think that would be true even if I didn't have ties to Chicago, because I am just obsessed with any love letter to a place.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about Lady Bird, is that and it makes it even better when it's a place that's like, really? You wrote a love letter to Sacramento? Yeah. Because it's somebody's favorite place. I mean, the same way that people are like, really? Almost Heaven, West Virginia? Yes. Shut up. And so, for me, it's the music, it's Chicago, it's driving Nazis off a bridge, and it's the we're getting the band back together for the Penguin. It's the loyalty.
And the fact that it just commits to its bit.
Oh God,
so hard. Like, they didn't have to actually crash on.
Nothing about this is ironic. This is not an ironic film.
No.
Like, this is a deeply earnest film that believes in the power of the band getting back together. Gosh dang it.
I mean, regular podcast listeners will know that me and my obsession with sincerity in media.
As you should be. Sincerity in media. I've been going back because at the time we're recording this, Good Omens 2 has recently dropped, which means it's time for me to go back and watch everything Michael Sheen and David Tennant, but especially David Tennant, have ever done. So I'm
back in the building again? I'm sorry.
I've gone back to my roots, and I've been watching the reboot of Doctor Who, except from the beginning, because Christopher Eccleston is a national treasure and we do not skip the Ninth Doctor in this house. And one of my favorite things about Doctor Who, when I started watching it as a 15-year-old and now in my adult life, God, what an earnest piece of media. Especially the early Russell T Davies, before we let my rant about Stephen Moffat and how we shouldn't let him do anything is not for this podcast. But it's so earnest. And that is its strength. All TV shows should be earnest and have a special effects budget of my high school drama club.
Yes.
I love that. I also love Simon's, what did you say again, sincerity?
Oh, yeah, my just like general obsession with sincerity in media.
But commitment to the bit. So
Yeah,
there's a criticism that someone could, and it won't be me, but someone could lob at this movie, and it's the same criticism I've heard lobbed at Ghostbusters. It's saying that there's technically no character growth. There's technically no arc.
The bit has been committed to.
Yeah, and there isn't like...
They're on a mission from God. Is this not enough for you people?
I would argue that this movie front loads its character development.
With that Chicago train apartment scene.
Yes. And the bit with James Brown in the church, obviously. And the bit with Cab Calloway and his speaking role. Like... Yeah, it front loads its characterness and then just
and then
goes
you get
from
to
there.
have fun listening to music for the next 2.5 hours.
Yes,
right.
You're welcome, America.
Yeah,
but if there's literally any emotional expression from Dan Aykroyd, I really only get it from the look on his face when he sees his brother asleep. And other than that, he's just...
And that's kind of part of the humor, though.
Right.
You know? So, yeah, that's such a good point, I think, about the sincerity. And
they don't feel like they don't feel like the different characters from minute 5 to minute 2:05, I guess.
No,
like,
but you understand that, like, they believe in it, man.
Yeah.
They're on a mission from God.
It's like they don't have to meet you where you're at. You have to meet them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and also nobody is like, oh, seriously? Everyone's like, oh, man, we're on a mission from God. Like, and that's just, I enjoy.
Well, that's 2 rallying lines that everyone can get behind.
Yeah.
We're on a mission from God.
Yeah.
We're getting the band back together.
Exactly.
You're pumped.
You're pumped. I mean, even just like, we're getting the band back together is it's right up there with like, I don't know, like what coming out of retirement from one last job.
Yeah.
Oh, we're putting together a heist full of people who only work alone. This is your PSA to watch Leverage.
Oh, yeah.
Like there are just those kinds, and then you put a road trip in it. Sign me up.
Yeah.
And several movies later have had those, like, I'm putting a band together, Ocean's 11, Armageddon. They all try it.
Yeah.
And they're going back to this movie.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, like, again, scanning through it, there's so many, like, classic things in this movie, but also no one ever talks about the cinematography.
Yeah.
Which, like, you've really just, especially when you've only got, you know, this movie also infamously didn't have a set budget to start with. That is part of the problem and why it became one of the most expensive comedies ever made. But
there's another problem. It's called cocaine.
But also, like, you know, you've got to really plan a shot if you're doing practical effects, and like they really framed that Pinto dropping from 1,000 feet. It was like beautifully. But also, there's a bit when in Ray Charles's number where he's playing the piano and they manage to catch a shot of the keyboard reflected in his glasses that I'm like, that was in like all the promo images for Ray when that came out.
Yep.
And like that is that movie.
That's magic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And like, again, you know, because the whole thing was done with practical effects, you know, that was a real shot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or there's even just something about the way John Candy's standing in front of Wrigley Field and they've like got him and the big this red glow
and it's Wrigley Field,
right?
Incredible.
Oh,
yeah, anything left unsaid about Blues Brothers? Jailhouse Rock. Great closing credits. You get to see everybody.
Yeah.
Shout out to the crew.
One of the guys from the Eagles was in that as like an extra jumping up on a table.
Oh wow!
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think my only comment is to say that I think in terms of, I think this should become a series called Movies with Really, Really Good Soundtracks. And I think we need to do Oh Brother, Where Art Thou next.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I'll talk about John Goodman any day.
Yeah.
Though we aren't going to talk about Blues Brothers 2000. No one talks about that movie.
I refuse to admit that movie exists.
Poor Joe Morton. I'm sorry, Joe.
I guess all that I have to say is like thanks to my parents for making, even before I saw this movie, making the soundtrack to this movie like part of our family identity.
Yeah, thanks to my parents for not paying too much attention to the politics of that movie so I could absorb them all as a preteen.
Perfect.
Yeah, I also was shown this movie very young.
Yeah.
But I think it does always come back to, well, the music is amazing.
Yeah.
These are iconic performers, recording artists, writers, artists. Blues Brothers. So that's our episode. Thanks for listening. You should come one by one. Come check it out from the library.
I mean, you can all put a hold on it at the same time. We can get copies from other libraries.
Copies out there
Yeah.
you could put a hold on. And
let me know if you want to see it on Blu-ray. I can make that happen.
I mean, I want to see it on Blu-ray, Simon.
Oh, okay.
And
then I'll make that happen.
I always have to make my plug here. We are not kidding when we say, let us know what you want. We love buying things that you are going to use.
Assuming
it's good for the circulation stats, assuming it is within the remit of our collection development policy.
Well, also assuming I can even buy it. Again, streaming services don't care about you.
Yes. So you should all yell at Hulu until they put Only Murders in the Building on DVD.
And Amazon for Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Yeah. But we have a fun little thing called a purchase request form.
Yes.
It is available both in person and on our website. If you say, hey, you don't seem to own this, I would like you to own this.
I can make that happen.
Fill out that handy dandy purchase request form, asterisk, if it's available for us to buy, asterisk, if it's within the remit of our collection development policy, which is available on the website.
That's right. And if it's movies, it's going to go to Simon.
Yes. Yeah. And if it's children's nonfiction or children's books in languages other than English or teaching resources, it's Mary Graham.
Or maybe it's music and it's going to go to Pietro and Michelle.
Yeah. Or Julia, if it's a children's CD.
You can come to the library and say, hey, I heard this name Stephen Malkmus referenced in the Barbie movie. I want to listen to that album.
Yeah.
Or you could say, hey, what's the deal with The Godfather? I've heard a lot of
But you do not have to know who is in charge of that section. Just walk up to any friendly library worker and say, behold, my purchase request form.
Maybe you'd like a children's nonfiction book about horses. You could also go to Mary Graham. I'm making Barbie references.
Yeah.
They're going to be in different places versus if they're wild or domestic horses. I'm really sorry. You're going to have to come ask at the desk. Melville Dewey, I'll see you in hell.
This has been another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library Podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library, and we love the Blues Brothers. That's just the end of the story.
Yep.
Remember to rate, review, subscribe, and please leave a positive review. It will help us find more listeners. And come get your library card, because it's literally days away from the library card sign-up month. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.